Hi, I am thrilled to be interviewing David Fradin today. David and I have just met, but we've both been in the computers for a very, very long time on very opposite ends. David was part of the Apple Corporation bringing the first hard drive to market, which I had no idea Apple was the first. I thought IBM had done it with their PC. So the computer geek in me is so excited for this interview. But David is also the CEO of Spice Catalyst and expert in product development and product management, and so I think there's many lessons for our small business audience to learn from his experience. So, David, welcome.
Glad to be with you.
I've been an Apple owner for a very long time. Actually, our business we bought a an IBM PC first, and I was trained in. I think it was called Focal was a language, a basic like language when I was in high school, and then I had to learn DOS because Windows didn't exist yet. But as soon as I found out about the Mac SE with the little 9-inch black and white screen, and I started lobbying with my dad, and we we got one of those, and so I've been kind of bilingual ever since. But yeah, I've been a Mac guy all along. So you came from HP to Apple, is that right?
Yes, I was trained as a product manager at HP. Then Apple recruited me to bring, as you mentioned, the first hard drive to market. It was called the Apple Profile. It had enormous space, uh, 5 megabytes. We just consumed in the last minute. And it was really cheap. It was only $3,500.
Oh,
The hard disk drive component was manufactured by and developed by Seagate. It was the ST5050 hard drive, 5 megabytes. And then about a year, maybe a year and a half later, IBM bought the 10 megabyte version from Seagate, and they shipped that as the PC XT. But it was well after when Apple did it. The Apple Profile primarily was targeted to the Apple III product line, which was the business slash office computer. And then we had a new operating system for the Apple II in order to support a volume of more than 143 kilobytes. And the reason the Apple II could only address 143 kilobytes is that was the size of the Shoegate floppy disk that was on there. And Steve Wozniak wrote the operating system for the Apple II, and it never dreamed that storage would be more than 143 kilobytes. And he wrote it in just a few weeks because before then, the Apple II would use a cassette tape for storage and retrieval, which of course was very slow, while the random access floppy disk was much faster. And they were going to introduce the Disc 2 at Comdex, which is the big computer show every November. And Steve Wozniak had never been to Las Vegas. So in order to be able to go to Las Vegas, he had to get the operating system written in a couple, 3 weeks.
wow. To my memory, he was quite a genius, I guess. I had thought that he was part of the design of that first hard drive that he used something about the Bernoulli principle, and he was really involved in the no. Okay.
After he did multiple designs of the Apple One and the Apple II, he went off to college at Berkeley, worked on his college degree. And then he bought a Beechcraft airplane and took off out of Hillview Airport, not far from where I live. And he forgot about the torque that the engine on the Beechcraft produces. And he was a very young, inexperienced pilot. I'm a flight instructor, so I know a little bit about this. So he flipped upside down and crashed at the end of the runway and wasn't injured too bad. And then after he recovered from his injuries, he came back to work for Apple. And by that point in time, I was in charge of the Apple III product line as the Apple III business unit manager. And he came to work for my engineering team. And one time I was walking in the halls and bumped into him. And I said, "Hi, Steve. How you doing?" He says, "Doing great." I said, "What have you accomplished today?" He says, "I got a key to the supply cabinet." Um, because at HP and at earlier at Apple, the engineers could get any parts they want for free out of the supply cabinet, and they could play around and develop new products. And he was so proud of the fact that he got the key to the supply cabinet.
Did he have to jump through a lot of hoops to get that?
probably had to yell and scream or persuade people that an open supply cabinet is important to innovation.
Wow. This is the first I have heard. I thought I knew a lot about Apple, but I was not aware of the Apple III product. Was it?
Well,
Did it really come to market?
and I closed it down. We had sold 75,000 Apple IIIs, sold for about seven to $10,000 a piece. So it was a business machine, usually with the hard disk drive, the profile, and then accounting software, spreadsheet software, word processing software, which was the most popular. And we introduced the first integrated database, spreadsheet, and word processing called Three Easy Pieces. And then later it was acquired by Microsoft after I shut down the Apple III product line. And it was a prelude. I think it was called Microsoft Works. And it was ported also to the Apple II, and it was called Apple Works there. And then that led later in the 1980s, I think about 1987 or so, for Microsoft to combine Excel, Microsoft Word, their database's name escapes me right now,
Access.
into Access, into a combined package, which completely wiped out things like WordPerfect and any other spreadsheet like VisiCalc in the marketplace. So the Apple III, with the 75,000 unit sales, was the third most popular computer in the history of the world at the time. Number one unit sales was the Apple II. The number two was the PDP-11, which was a mini computer from the Digital Equipment Corporation. And then there was the Apple III. The Lisa development started in the same room at the same time as the Apple III, and I had a lot of fun going to monthly forecasting meetings of what our sales are going to be. And I would say for the 18th month, a straight month in a row, the Apple III has outshipped Lisa, which hadn't shipped yet. It came out a couple years. Well, actually came out about 3.5 years after the Apple II was introduced. Excuse me, the Apple III was introduced. And the first product manager on the Apple III was a fellow by the name of Steve Jobs. And he did a very poor job because when the computer was shipped and it arrived at a dealer, they took it out of the box and plugged it in and it wouldn't boot up. So they had no quality assurance on the product through manufacturing and through delivery. And some support people found that what had happened is the chip holding design in the Apple III was such that the chips could work loose from the vibrations of shipping. So they told the dealers, pick the thing up. It was a solid aluminum chassis, no fan because Steve did not like the noise of a fan. And you drop it from a foot onto the floor or onto the table. That would reseat the chips and then you could boot the thing up. But imagine being told to pick up the computer and drop it, which kind of hurt its reputation for a bit. It also was introduced in October of, what was it, 1980. Some alleged because Apple was trying to go public and they wanted to use that to help them boost the stock price. Don't know for sure if that story is true. I wasn't at Apple yet, but it was shipped without any software. It just had a fledgling operating system called SOS, SOS, for Sarah's operating system. And the rumor was that it was named that because one of Steve's girlfriend's names was Sarah. So he left that, and then they pushed him aside. And the president at the time, Mike Markkula, was smart enough to keep him around because he was a visionary. He could imagine what the PC industry is going to be like 6 to 8 years later. Unfortunately, he always thought it was that time. What's going to be around in 6 to 8 years was that day. So he was sent to run the Macintosh development, and a fellow by the name of Jeff Raskin was the chief architect at the time. So Steve forced Jeff out of the Macintosh development team, and he finally shipped his Macintosh in January of 1984. I produced enough profits with the Apple III product line, selling 25,000 of them, to keep 1,000 to 1,500 people at Apple employed, and also to help provide the funding that Steve needed for his Macintosh development. But he campaigned to cancel the Apple III product line because he felt it was occupying a place in the marketplace that he wanted his beloved Macintosh to go into. So I had to cross daggers with him several times to prevent him from doing that.
Wow, this is like the untold story of Apple. This is great. I had no idea. I remember the Lisa. I remember it being pretty pricey. Was it competitive? Was it trying to go for a business market, or was it just a real pricey luxury PC?
They weren't sure what it was trying to go for, and that was part of the problem. One of the first, and when I took over the Apple III product line, first as a group product manager, and then later as the independent business unit manager, um, the highly paid MBAs from Harvard and Stanford, and there were a lot of them at the company, couldn't figure out what market it was that the Apple III was targeting at. So I went downstairs into the engineering area of the Triangle building along Lawrence Expressway and Highway 280, where the Apple III and Apple II engineering teams were in the personal computer systems division, of which I was in. And I asked Jeff, who did you build this computer for? Who did you design it for? And he described perfectly the persona of who they designed the computer for. The marketing people didn't know what it is. And now that's marketing's job, is to know what is the persona of your target customer. And he told me it was for small and medium business, and it was for office applications, hence the large disk drive, hence a letter quality printer, hence good word processing, big spreadsheets, super visit calc, databases, and so forth. So that's who we marketed it to. And Steve wanted his Macintosh to go into the same market. And Lisa thought that they were going to go into that market, into the office market. But because it cost $10,000, it was priced out of the marketplace. But if they had gone out as I did and asked people who bought leases why they bought them, it was bought in big companies' graphics departments to make overhead transparencies. Because up until then, we would use an electric Selectric typewriter from IBM, and an order ball that you would put on there was gave you larger type. Well, with Lisa, because it was graphically oriented, you can have as large a type as you want, and also illustrations, which was not possible any other way. And it saved companies millions of dollars in the time of having to lay out overhead transparencies one letter at a time off of a stencil, for example. So they didn't understand their market. As a result, they didn't understand who to market it to, and that its value proposition is and was as I described, and it was a substantial savings of time and money in those applications. The lease also did not allow outside developers to develop software for it in the same way that Steve did not allow that to happen for the Macintosh. And after the Mac was introduced in January of '84 with tremendous hype, over 100,000 of them were sold, and then mostly to developers. And they found that there's not much they could do with only 128 kilobytes of memory, such that 64K of that was taken up by the bitmap screen. The rest was taken up by the operating system. So the largest program they could write was 10K. So Apple sales dropped to 4 units in January of 1985. And Lisa sales were falling because Steve did not understand what market to go after with it. And because the Lisa was introduced in early 1983 with tremendous hype. And I remember when the general manager of Lisa came into the room at the first Apple Developers Conference in May of 1983, and he carried a suitcase filled with magazines that had the Lisa on the cover. Well, they had done a tremendous PR job to get tremendous coverage, and everybody wanted a Lisa. So people would go to their dealer and order a Lisa, which of course had not yet shipped. And they really wanted a Lisa. So they went to another dealer and ordered one, no down payment required. And then they went to another dealer and ordered one, such that when the first Lisas shipped, sales of Lisa dropped by 2/3 because the other two orders were canceled because they already got their Lisa. So Lisa sales, like I said, the Apple III outshipped the Lisa for the 24th month in a row. So when Steve took over the Lisa division, he canceled the product line, scared the hell out of Wall Street. The stock price went down, and he became a great liability. And John Scully had a fight with him, and the board sided with Scully and asked Steve to go find something else to do. So he went off and did his last computer called Next, which also sold for $10,000. And he also mispositioned it in the market. I found out just recently that it was a mainframe on your desk. So a professor at a university could run their computer programs without having to stand in line with their punch cards at the computer bay for the IBM 360 or the IBM 370, as I had to do when I took Fortran programming training at University of Michigan. So that failed. And then Steve was in the midst of having a failure of Pixar, which he had recently acquired. And he sought out some counseling, some mentoring from the fellow I used to do PR for a little bit for the board, a fellow by the name of Dave Packard, the Packard of Hewlett Packard. And Packard taught him, for example, and I found this out when I was researching my book, Building and Sailing Great Products, that he had told Steve, don't be afraid to cannibalize your own product line, because if you don't, someone else will do it. Well, Steve, up until then, was in the business of trying to cancel his internal competitors without having a suitable product to replace it. That is, the Mac could not replace what the Apple III could do and could not replace what the Lisa could do. So Steve learned from that. And then when he came back to Apple around, what was it, 1998, he also came back to Apple values, which he had poo-pooed when he was at Apple in the early 80s. And it included such things as individual achievement, recognition, good management, values, quality product for take and empathy for our customers. And Tim Cook, the current president of Apple, remarked in an interview 5, 6 years ago that it's those values that drives Apple, and that's why Apple continues to be one of the most successful and one of the most valuable companies in the world. So there was two Steve Jobs. There was the one that I knew back in the 80s, and then there's the one that came back to Apple that everybody celebrates. And to prove he learned his lesson, he didn't hesitate to come out with the iPhone that had the iPod as part of it and didn't worry about cannibalizing sales of iPods as he would have done 20 years earlier.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that out. Yeah, because I remember iPhone was almost iPod 2.0, but it did completely replace the iPod. Wow, so much there. I mean, I'm looking forward to reading your book now. I remember that Steve Jobs left and he went, founded the Next computer company and Next Cube, and I did not realize he was intending it to be for university level. I thought it was for mission critical business stuff that was like stock exchanges and things like that. But
Well, it should have been targeted at universities because that's where its sweet spot was. That's where its value proposition existed.
oh, okay, okay.
And also, the reason you don't hear these other stories is that frequently people hire ghostwriters for their stories. For example, when John Scully's book on Apple came out, I happened to be traveling someplace and saw the book in a bookstore in an airport. And I picked it up and I wanted to see if it had anything accurate to say about my product line, the Apple III. So I looked up Apple III in the index and went to each of the sections where the Apple III was mentioned, and it was all wrong, which convinced me that what happens is a PR flack grabs hold of the story and wants to promote the fiction, the fantasy, as opposed to the reality. The unfortunate thing for that is small businesses and family businesses read these books and they think that's the way things should be done. They copy that and then they fail and they don't understand why. So I had people back in the 80s tell me they want to grow up and be just like John Scully. Well, Scully was an architect and he was a president of Pepsi of America. And we had fun with him because we knew he didn't understand anything about computers or anything about the technical support required for computers. So we would put together promotions like to the dealers, buy 6 Apple IIIs and get one free, sort of like some of the old Pepsi promotions. And he understood that, and he would sign off on those promotions right away.
Well, from a user standpoint, I remember, I had the Macintosh through all of those years, and I can't remember which. I had the Power. I think the Power PC Mac for a bit, and that was about the time OS 9. I remember OS 9 because it seemed like a patchwork of stuff put together, and it crashed all the time. It was complete opposite of all my previous Apple experience. And I had a brief time when I didn't own an Apple because it had gotten so bad. And then when Jobs came back with OS 10 from which was based on, I think, the next operating system, and they had a stable operating system, then things got straightened out pretty quick. But there were some dark days there for a bit.
Apple in those days from about 1985 to 1998 decided first under Scully and then people that came out after him. Gil Amelio was the last president before Jobs. They wanted to replicate the IBM PC. So it was a rectangular steel box, which was ugly as hell. So they lost the thought of design. And they also lost the thought of making it user friendly. And so someone could pick it up and start using it and figure it out as they go along. They didn't have crazy things like Windows had. In order to shut down the computer, you click on start. I was doing a lot of video production back then on the PC. And I switched to the PC too for the same reason around 1995 or so. It was just constantly crashing the PCs. I'd have two PCs on my desk so I could work on one while the other one was rebooting. So I would always say there was the Microsoft position, which is called rebooting. And it was so non-intuitive. People talk about brands for your product and brands for your company. A brand is the promise of the product or the promise of your company. So, and that's usually epitomized in a tagline. So I advocated for a long time that Apple should have the tagline, "It just works." And the Microsoft tagline should be helping more people feel more stupid than any other company in the world.
Wow, yeah. I It seems like they were designing for developers. So as many people could build something or make a software product or a hardware product to plug into it as possible and please everybody. And wow. Yeah, you had to be pretty technically proficient to keep it going. That's right. Do you remember the
Yes.
operating system that IBM came out with for a bit?
Well, they had there
I,
was an
I think it was.
outfit out of Santa Cruz, and they bought that operating system from them, and that was the original DOS operating system.
Okay. I
And
am
it
having
was
trouble remembering. It was going to replace Windows. There was a lot of fanfare. I want to say it was it OS one or gosh, I just drew a blank. But they tried to keep a graphical user interface, but make it much faster and more memory efficient and so forth, and less crash prone.
I don't know
But
if they ever shipped it, but when they finally did come out with Windows, Apple sued them for stealing their user interface. And then before it went to trial, the company settled, uh, mainly because Apple needed uh, the support of Microsoft, and Apple's Macintoshes were being sold because of Microsoft Office by that point.
yes, well, and Apple had gotten access to the Xerox PARC. Um, all their stuff in the mouse, all of that they copied basically from Xerox early days, didn't they?
That did back to the late 70s, early 80s, 10, 15 years before the litigation between Microsoft and Apple. Then Microsoft was broken up with the antitrust settlement with the Department of Justice. And the current three lawsuits against Google at the Department of Justice is mirroring that same kind of monopolistic activities of Google,
I see.
which
I
is quite
see.
ironic because their founding value system was do no evil, but they can manipulate with their search results which ads get posted, and as a result, develop a monopoly on ads.
Yeah, and we probably shouldn't even go into what AI is doing now. Well, I was looking at your you had a TEDx talk. I saw that on YouTube, and you were talking about HP having 20% growth year over year for 50 years, and that was your training ground. Like, what a
Yep.
great place to learn. What were some, I don't know, key lessons, the or principles? You keep mentioning values, and I love that because I think values really, we're very behavior oriented, and I believe that values underlie, how we think, and how we process, the decisions we make, and then our thoughts is what leads to our behaviors, and then everything else comes from that. So values is at the
Yep.
core.
Values is at the core, and anybody that just starts a business should first sit down and write out what their values are. Values at Hewlett Packard was called the HP way. Values at Apple was called Apple values. And they were formed early in the company's formation back in 1978, shortly after the company was started. And I think it was probably encouraged by a lady by the name of Ann Bowers, who was the vice president of HR at Apple at the time. I didn't know it when I met her in 1982, and she was still there, head of HR. She was the head of HR for Intel, and she married Bill Noyce, or is it Bill Noyce? I forget Noyce's first name, who was one of the co-founders of Intel. So we all knew when I was at HP and we went into a room, and when I was at Apple, we went into a room to have a discussion, make a decision, that we were all coming from exactly the same place. And thought about that a little bit. And then when I was researching my book, Building Insanely Great Products, by the way, listeners can find that book on Amazon around the world and just type in my name, David Fradin, Fradin, and I'll come up as an author on that book and other books. I wondered if companies that had values or didn't have values or didn't follow values were successful or not. So I happen to be very familiar with many of the Fortune 500 companies on the first Fortune 500 list of 1965. And the reason being is in 1970, 1971, after I started the flying club at the University of Michigan, my aerospace engineering professor, Wilbur Nelson, was on Lyndon Johnson's Supersonic Transport Advisory Committee. And it was in trouble in Congress because environmentalists felt it was going to destroy the environment. And there was a strong anti-technology feeling in the country, suggesting that it was the technology destroying the environment. Misunderstanding that all technology is the organization of knowledge for practical purposes. So if that happens to be causing some environmental degradation, it is also technology that will resolve that. We see that today. Solar power, wind power, wave power, geothermal power, hydropower, battery power, electric power, so forth, are helping replace fossil fuels. So technology can fix these things, but that was not recognized back then. And Wilbur asked me if I wanted to start a national student organization in favor of America's supersonic transport. And he named it FAST, FASST. And not having any idea of what I was getting myself into, I said yes. And within the next year, I had about 40 some chapters with about 15,000 members at campuses across the country. And I was raising about 100 and some $1,000 a year from the Fortune 500. So I knew many of those companies personally. I knew their chairman of the board or their presidents because I had met with them in my fundraising efforts. This would be companies like Boeing and United Technologies and LTV down in Dallas and so forth. And I made a list of the 25 of the 500 Fortune companies, and I could check off in the first column, did they have values or not? The second column is, did they follow their values or not? Like Volkswagen, who had a beautiful set of values before their senior managers allowed the deception to occur on their diesel cars, which has cost that company tens of billions of dollars, not only in lost brand, but also now having to shift entirely to electric automobiles. And the Volkswagen funded electric charging stations around the world, which is costing VW billions of dollars, is their payback as a result of breaking their own values. And then the third column is, do those companies still exist? Almost without exceptions, those companies that had no values or did not follow their values have gone out of business. Those that had values and followed them thrived. I also wondered if that would apply to me personally. So I made a list of the 25 organizations that I've been associated with, starting with my flying club, through FAST, through the Environmental Balance Association of Minnesota, through running Al Quee's gubernatorial campaign in Minnesota, where we were successful, running John Conley's presidential campaign in Minnesota, where we got four more delegates than they did in New Hampshire. We got four, they got zero, and then on to HP, Apple, and so forth. And those organizations that had values, followed those values, and mapped it to my values, I was very successful at, I was very happy at, and I got promoted. Those that either didn't have values or did not follow values, either I was fired and I felt better the next day, or I quit and I felt better the next day. I call those mercy killings. So I suggest to anybody, if they're looking for an opportunity, after they answer all of the hiring person's questions, that ask them, what are their values? And a friend of mine that used to manage my rental property that I have on the ocean in Maui moved back to the Bay Area, went out looking for a job. I told him that story. And on one of the interviews in the next few days he went on, he discussed values and the hiring manager discussed values. He said they talked for 4 hours. They hired him and he's never been happier before in a job. So, yeah, values is at the foundation of what's going on.
And value alignment, you just touched on. I think that's a huge thing, and that is a theme I've actually heard from some people I've interviewed. That part of what they're hiring for when they hire is value alignment, and where there's value alignment, A, people are happier, and B, they last, because they have and it's, I mean, that's just part of life. It seems, that we like people that share our values. We, whether it's valuing something like flying, I have a good friend who's a pilot, or deeper values, but it's a core part of our lives. I love that you brought this up. So product success. I know you're when we first our first introduction was about 5 keys to product success, is kind of where your speaking focus is.
Well, I developed a mnemonic to help remember the 5 keys to product and business success. And this also applies to services. Services are just intangible products. S stands for a product market strategy, which has 32 different components, ranging from understanding what the market looks like, your competitive research, the personas of who you're targeting, what it is that your customer wants to do, to personas, to product positioning, to target markets, to total available markets, to distribution strategy, pricing strategy, support and service strategy, and so forth. And I advocate that those 32 components get written out first in your business plan before you start development. And that's the way Apple does things. That's the way HP used to do things. They don't just throw things out there and see what happens in the marketplace, like Facebook does, act fast and break things. Well, Facebook acted fast enough and broke enough things that he's broken the democratic system in the United States, when half the people believe the lies that are being circulated simply to get more clicks to make more money. So that's the S in SPICE. The P stands for repeatable processes. The I stands for having the information available to make an informed decision. The C stands for understanding what it is your customer wants to do, why they want to do it, when they want to do it, where they want to do it, how they want to do it, what's standing in their way, how important it is to get that thing done, and how satisfied are they with the current solution. And then the E stands for the competencies or skill sets. And I've identified 130 of them that companies and organizations should have if they're going to have a successful product. As a result of not following these 5 keys to product and services success, about 35% of all new products fail in the marketplace, representing a waste to humanity of about $1 trillion a year, and growing.
Wow. Wow. $1 trillion a year just wasted in ideas that weren't well executed.
They didn't follow the 5 keys to product
Those
success.
keys. That's mind blowing. Mind blowing. So, what is your business, Spices Catalyst? Do you consult with companies? Is that your primary purpose?
We do consulting, but our bigger part of our business is training. We teach product managers and product marketing managers all the things I just described. Our largest client is Cisco, and we've trained nearly half of all Cisco product managers over the last 10 years, not only in the United States, but also in Europe and in Asia.
So, that's the Cisco Electronics company, the networking company, not the food supplier, right?
Yeah, the networking company. Yeah, not the food.
ISTO. Okay. I see a lot of the food trucks around my area, so I thought I'd better mention that. Well, bringing it back a little bit to smaller businesses, how would a business owner or a smaller business owner, like when we were talking about you, when you started introducing product management, you said it also applies to services. I'm so glad you did that because my brain had gone to, oh, well, what if I've got a service instead of a product? So I'm really glad you covered that. But so again, the bigger companies, lots of resources, lots of people, different departments, all that. How would a smaller business implement what you're teaching?
Well, keep their powder dry and take 3 to 6 people months and put together the product market strategy before they launch. I did not do that in the early 2000s. RCN magazine, which covered the telecommunications market, gave me credit for inventing the first advertisement on a cell phone. This was in 2003. So I thought that was pretty good. And I had several games developed for the Nokia cell phones and several gadgets. For example, I had a virtual lighter called Light My Fire on Nokia phone. And it was such that if you go to a concert and you want an encore, in the olden days, you'd pull out your cigarette lighter and hold it up and wave it back and forth. Well, you'd reach into your pocket and realize you stopped smoking. So people would pull out Light My Fire. Oh, no, it's called Encore Encore. And they would wave their cell phone around to get an encore. And it became so interesting that the Los Angeles Times wrote an article about it where people were showing Encore Encore at a Hollywood Bowl concert for some musician. And I had another little app, which was a virtual fireplace. So when you're out at a hot date and you like to have a fireplace at your table, you pull out your cell phone and you have a little fireplace. Silly stuff like that. And then there would be ads on it. We developed a cell phone game called Maui Mountain Biking. And you would mountain bike down Haleakala, the tallest mountain of the world, measured from the seafloor. And then if you should fall off the edge, the crash will be brought to you by Saucony running shoes or K2 bikes or something like that, which are advertises and paid. Well, I had not done a product market strategy before I had these products developed. And I believe Nokia when they told me that they had the largest installation of cell phones worldwide. So I built it. And I also put together a sales force to sell advertising on the phones, but they were US based. And I found out after introduction, and I had 10,000 of my applications like Encore Encore and Maui mountain biking and Hawaii frisbee golf and other type things running on Nokia phones. Well, the install base for Nokia was in Asia, and who had no money to buy anything, so nobody wanted to advertise there then. And in Europe, but my sales force was selling to U.S. companies that wanted to advertise to U.S. customers, not European customers. So because I had a disconnect between my target persona and my distribution strategy, I ran out of money and went out of business before the iPhone was introduced, which then turned cell phone advertising into the last time I checked a few years ago, it's over $15 billion a year spent by advertisers on cell phone advertising.
And I've
So I
seen that Zippo lighter on the screen of an iPhone. Oh my goodness.
I missed my market because I didn't do my market research and my product market strategy before I spent the money on product development. So that's my advice to any small business starting out. Don't rush to market. Don't rush to the product. Don't act fast, fail fast, and break things like Facebook does. Like Meta, which owns Facebook, came out about 6 months ago that they're going to use the posts that we put on Facebook to train their artificial intelligence engine. Well, if half of them are lies, can you imagine the results from the AI engines coming out of Meta? That is one of the scariest things in the world. Uh, One of the things that formerly Twitter does is they use wisdom of the crowds, which was developed in the computer science department in the 1990s at Stanford. And it said, if people like this, others will like this. If people click on this, others will click on this. If people don't like this, they won't click on it, that kind of thing. So that's the core algorithm that's driving recommendations. And then, of course, in the case of Elon Musk, he's had the algorithms tweaked so his posts are shown to everybody on Twitter, and anything that he doesn't like is downplayed and not shown to anybody else. So those are the games that can be played in these hidden algorithms. And I always say that wisdom of the crowds is useful when you're at Amazon and you want to considering buying a product and make some recommendations to you, or on Netflix where you've watched several movies and they know what kind of movies like, and they start recommending movies to you. That's fine. It doesn't hurt anybody. But in the case of wisdom of the crowds in the wrong hands, like Twitter and like Instagram and like WhatsApp and like Facebook, I always cite the situation where people go to a large auditorium or a bar, there's a band they're playing, fire breaks out, and everybody has to try to leave through the same door that they came in on. And every few years, we have a lot of people killed inside these establishments because they can't get out the door. Forgetting, of course, that the band came in from the stage door, and maybe if they didn't follow the wisdom of the crowd rushing out that one door and went around behind the stage and went out the stage door, they'd be alive today. So that's one of the key things that needs to be considered.
Great, great piece of wisdom right there. Wow. Yes. The common opinion isn't necessarily the smartest or the most true.
That's right.
So we've got your website. I'll make sure I put that in the description and show notes. Then you've also got your books on Amazon, several books on Amazon, and you've got several courses on Udemy. I saw.
Right. And links to all of that can be reached through spicecatalyst.com.
Okay, so that's kind of information central would be spicecatalyst.com. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. This has been a real treat. And man, just geeking out over Apple and all that, learning all the new things I learned.
Well, thank you for putting up with me.
It's a pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure. And since we are at the beginning of the holiday season, regardless of when anybody's watching this, have a happy holiday season.
You too, and everybody watching and listening.
Thank you.